You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Successful Screenwriter Podcast, where we discuss anything and everything screenwriting. Here we interview successful screenwriters and filmmakers to find out just what it takes to make it in the industry. All right, welcome to the podcast. We have on a very special guest today. We have on the writer of Final Destination, Geoffrey Reddick. Thank you for being on with us today.
Thank you for having me. Other Geoffrey.
I know I spell mine weird, so you're totally normal. It's all right.
No, you spell yours cool.
Yeah, it's very writerly. I'll tell you that
yes.
much. Well, I wanted to reach out today because I love to bring on professionals and experts like yourself, and then kind of peel the veil back on the writing process and how you design what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And Final Destination, I have to be honest with you, one of my favorites. Love it. And it's spawned so many sequels. And my wife is even into it, and she hates scary films. So if that tells you anything.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Before we kind of do this dive into it, though, I want to kind of get your origin story, how you started writing, how you kind of broke into the industry, and kind of like what led you to that big break.
My origin story is a little unique, as I think all origin stories are. I've always been a big horror movie fan, and when I was 14, I saw the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie, which I fell madly in love with.
Yeah,
it's still my favorite movie of all time for creative and for personal reasons. And when I saw that film, I went home, and I'm this little 14-year-old hillbilly in Kentucky, don't know anything about the movie business, and I found out who ran the studio that made the movie, Bob Shea, and got his address, and I typed up a prequel idea and I mailed it to him, and he sent it back to me. I know, only the balls of a 14-year-old hillbilly. And he sent it back to me because it was unsolicited, and I had to look up what that meant because I was only 14. And then I wrote him back and I sent it back to him again, and I'm like, look, sir, I've spent like $3 on your movie, so I think you can take 5 minutes to read my story. And he read it, and he got back to me, and from the age of 14 to 19, when I ended up eventually going to New York, him and his assistant, Joy Mann, who is unfortunately no longer with us, they kind of took me under their wing. They would send me movie scripts. They would send me posters, tchotchkes, read my stuff. Just very encouraging.
Yeah.
So my dream at the time was to be an actor. So when I was 19, I went to New York to study at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. But while I was there, Joy and Bob offered me an internship for the summer at New Line. So the acting looked like it was going to take off, but this was back in the day when non-traditional casting wasn't a thing.
Right.
Yeah. My agent told me I was an ethnic Michael J. Fox type, which I thought was awesome because everybody loved Michael J. Fox, and they still do. But she's like, yeah, but they don't write roles for that. So she said, if you rapped or played basketball, we could cast you. But
my goodness.
Yeah. But she's being honest. She's like, I just don't know what to do with you.
Yeah.
So luckily, instead of letting that kind of crush me, English was my best subject in school.
Mm-hmm.
Writing was my second passion. So I was like, well, if there aren't any roles for people like me out there, then I'll just write them, which I didn't end up doing, but for myself. But I stayed on at New Line. I stayed on there and continued working. They created a special position for me to fill in for all the executive assistants for the tops of all the departments while I was there. So I got to kind of learn about all the different divisions at New Line. And I worked there for 11 years. And they ended up picking up Final Destination. Long and short, because people always say, it must have been great having an in because you worked at the studio. And it certainly was fine. But I had so many projects that either got good coverage but never went further.
Yeah.
Or projects that didn't get good coverage. I learned how the business operated, which was very good creatively because then I didn't take all the rejection personally. But when I set up Final Destination there, I knew I wrote it as a treatment. This was back in the day when you could sell treatments to studios and they would pay you to develop scripts. But I took it to two producers, Craig Perry and Warren Zeid, who had a deal at New Line, because I knew New Line would take it more seriously if I came to them with producers attached.
Right.
And we still had a hard time setting it up because they couldn't get their minds around death being a killer. Like, you can't see it, you can't fight it. It doesn't make sense. And finally, we were like, well, we're going to take it to Miramax if you pass on it again. And they're like, we'll buy it. So
put the pressure on.
Yeah, the pressure on.
Let's unpack a little bit about that. I love this origin story. It's the hubris of a 14-year-old. I have to tell you, man, absolutely amazing. My son is 14, and I can see that kind of that brazen wit where you're like, you know what, I'm just going to do this. And I love the fact that you're like, well, you spent $3 on your movie. The least you can do is read it. I think that's wow, that's great. So you took that lead and look where it led you. Being there, coming up with Final Destination, and we'll get to that in a second. Did you get coverage on the treatment, or did you just write the treatment and then you started getting people reading it and interested that way?
I didn't get coverage on the treatment. I just, what happened is I had originally, to get a TV agent, I used the concept for Final Destination as an X-Files spec. But then my friends at New Line, it got me an agent, but they're like, don't send this in for the X-Files. Like, this is a feature idea.
Yeah. So where did you come up with the idea of death as an antagonist? Because it's so original, and original ideas, original concepts like that really grab people. Obviously, it had never been done before. So was there something that influenced it? Was it the X-Files? Was there something else?
The kernel of the idea came when I was flying home to visit my family in Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And I read an article about a woman who was on her vacation, and her mother called her and said, don't take the flight that you're on tomorrow. I have a bad feeling about it. Okay. And she switched flights and the plane crashed. So I read this on a plane, and I just filed it away. You know, I'm like, this is an interesting idea, but I didn't know what the story was for it. Yeah. So then when I needed to come up with a spec script, you know, I was like, what would be a great opening scene for an X-Files episode? Yeah. I thought about the premonition, Dana Scully's brother, Charles, who we never really saw in the series. It was always the other brother that we saw a lot. Yeah. So, and so, I was like, well, if he missed his time to die, then he cheated death. That's where that kind of core idea came from. And then when I expanded it to a feature, I took it in a different direction, because in the X-Files episode, it was her brother specifically who had cheated. Well, he got a couple people off the plane with him too. Now that so that's where the idea percolated. And then I developed it more fully with Craig Perry and Warren Zide and Chris Bender at their company. Yeah. And I mean, that's where that kind of iconic airplane scene comes from. And I think that is the opening of, it's been a minute since I've seen it, but I think that is the opening is the airplane scene. Yeah. And that's where all the kids are, they all cheat death. And so then, the faceless enemy is just brilliant, you know, because it keeps the tension on, and the way that you design that story and the writers that came on as well that crafted it keeps you on the edge of your seat, because you don't see the enemy, right? And that's where fear lies in a good thriller, in a good horror movie, is not being able to see the enemy. You know, as soon as you see Freddy, and you finally see Freddy, he's scary, but he's not as scary as the claws on the wall or the creepy thing coming through the wall. You know, that's where the fear is. And your concept itself totally embraces that. I think it's absolutely brilliant. So when it came time to designing and developing these death scenes, I mean, you must have went through dozens trying to figure this out. Well, it was very interesting because, you know, I wrote the first draft of this script based off of my, treatment. And in my original script, obviously, again, with Nightmare on Elm Street being a big influence of mine, in the original draft of my script, the characters met similar deaths, but in my version, death, since it kind of messed up the first time, it couldn't just come back and kill them. So it basically mind effed them till they committed suicide, which is pretty grim. Yeah. But so there it was a lot more Nightmare on Elm Street vibe to it in my original script. And what James Wong and Glenn Morgan did, which I think is brilliant, is they added the whole Rube Goldberg aspect of it.
Right. Yeah.
Which I think grounded it more in reality, which allowed it to kind of expand beyond the horror audience to reach a wider audience.
Yeah, and it ups the intensity, really, because you're like, okay, what's falling in the bathtub, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're like, oh no. Yeah, well, the other thing I want to mention about Final Destination, I mean, you talk Nightmare on Elm Street. Nightmare on Elm Street, to me, it holds up still to this day. If you watch it to this day, I mean, the outfits and hairstyles have changed, but it is still creepy.
Yeah.
And I think Final Destination is the same way. I think the first one still holds up to this day. Scares are scares. And you wrote characters that you can get behind, you know. I mean, you wrote characters that are empathetic and sympathetic in a way. Allie Larder's character, I think her name was Clear. You know, that was a great character that you could. She's innocent, she's sweet, you could get behind her. And then, you know, she makes it, right? But then, you know, I hate to say spoiler alert, but in the second one, eventually it gets her. You know, and that's where you're like, oh man, you thought you could cheat death and you can't. And I love it. So it's like, it's inevitable. Were you designing this to be franchisable as you were writing it?
Yeah. I mean, just, you know, growing up, you know, as I say, at a studio, like you definitely know that that's what they want. They want something to be a franchise. And obviously, even just growing up on horror films, most horror films have sequels. So you kind of have that in your DNA. You know, I don't like movies where they end on a bad opening,
like a somber note.
Yeah, where, you know, like the survivor escapes the killer and then the killer jumps out and kills him at the last scene. Like, I hate those movies. Yeah, I knew the concept, as long as, you know, and I believed in it, and I know that James Wong and Glenn Morgan believed in it, and the studio, you know, they believed in it, but they were still nervous about it. Right. You know, it was actually a sleeper hit. You know, it opened at like number 3, but then every weekend after started going up till it got to number 1. So it was definitely a word of mouth hit. Yeah. But yeah, I always wrote it to be a sequel.
Yeah, keep it open.
To have a franchise.
Yeah, and that comes around the concept. I mean, the concept can be one of those timeless concepts that carries on. I mean, Final Destination is I think it's going on like 20 years. Is that right? I think
it's 20 years.
Yeah. So it's going on like 20 years, and I think they've had, I don't know, 5 or 6.
Only 4 sequels.
4. Only 4.
No, but but I only say this as a horror fan. If you look at like all the other, like Friday the 13th and Halloween, and they've all had like 20 sequels and remakes and stuff.
Yeah.
But the studio's.
I love that. I love that. That's your bar. Like, I will take 4 sequels of anything I've written.
I don't want to. I'm so grateful. Like, I'm so grateful. But just as a horror fan, and I know the fans want more. Yeah. It's just the studio's been very like finicky about making more of them.
Sure. Well, that's anything. That's anything now, though. I mean, you know, everything is kind of getting tighter, and budgets are dropping, and COVID doesn't help, and everything.
And our budgets were never small. The first couple were like 20, and then once it got to 3D, the budgets jumped up to around 40. So,
I mean, I think really what you and I are talking about, you know, I was thinking this was going to go in the direction of writing towards horror, but I think really what we're discussing is how to create something original that can really go, you know, like have legs in it.
Yeah.
So what are your recommendations other than writing it, other than being in an airplane and reading about a lady that escaped death on an airplane, which if that was me, I'd have been freaking out that whole flight. So. Yeah. I'm glad that you just went, I'll just put this in my back pocket, and I'd be like freaking nervous.
I think I wasn't that nervous actually. You know what, the thing is, you can always write for a franchise, but it depends on the execution. What I try to do with my concepts are, you know, I'm very interested in the human condition and like things that scare everybody. Okay. Like, I think that's why Final Destination has such legs, is because we didn't put a face to death on it. So it doesn't matter if you're religious, if you're not religious, what your religion is, what your cultural background is. Yeah. You can project death that you can relate to that movie, and you don't have the barriers up of having it be specific. Yeah. With my movie Tamara, you know, it was about bullying. You know, it's kind of also my kind of update on Carrie, because I love Carrie. I just don't like the idea that you have to wait till the last 15 minutes for her to kill everybody.
Yeah, it is a little slow burn, isn't it?
Yeah. But I love the movie. But I was like, I want to do something, you know, I kind of want to take that concept and you know, again, that's something that we can all relate to.
Yeah. So you're talking about, because I actually mentioned this in my book. So you're talking about basically writing towards like a universal human condition.
Yes.
And so by writing about death, you're absolutely right. That transcends everything. It transcends religion and everything. Yeah. And it's coming for us all. And to work that into it's absolutely brilliant, man. I love it. And this, like Nightmare on Elm Street hits you because everybody dreams, right? So yeah, it's another one of those universal concepts. I'd say, for instance, like Jason, I'd say the big appeal for him is that for me, he's always represented that unstoppable terror that we all feel could be coming for us. And I think that's why those kind of work, other than the fact that you can get into like debauchery and stuff like that. But, yeah. So that's really interesting. So yeah, developing a concept using that universal human condition is a good way to give a script legs. So you did this in Tamara. What was it the same kind of process for you, or did you kind of like sit down and design something like I'm specifically going to create this?
I designed it, and a lot of Tamara came from a place of everybody kept wanting me. They kept saying, "Bring us something like Final Destination." You know, like every.
Oh, that's got to be tough.
Yeah, I was like, "Oh yeah, I got a whole drawer full of them over here." Thank God, I was just saving them. And then I would come up with ideas and they were like, oh, that's too much like Final Destination, or this one's not like Final Destination enough. And finally I realized like, I can't keep chasing that dragon because it anytime a movie, it's hard enough to get a movie made, but if a movie becomes a hit, it's like lightning in a bottle. Like it has to happen at the right time. It has to happen, the right place. There's a lot of pieces that go into making it a hit. And I was like, let me just write something fun. And I've been bullied growing up because, I'm a person of color and I'm gay. And so I definitely understand bullying. And again, I like the idea of Carrie where the bully, I think that's one of the things that attracts people to horror is usually the final girl or the final guy in some horror films is never like the most popular kid in school.
No. And neither are horror fans. I mean, if you go to a horror convention, they're all normal people, or they're super geeks like me. You're never going to a horror convention seeing like, the quarterback of the football team.
But the quarterbacks like them. It's so funny. It's just, the quarterbacks like them too. And the prom queens like them too. So, but yeah, so I was like, well, everybody, let me just write a fun movie that has everything in it that I would want to see. Yeah. So that's where I knew I had the universal concept with the bullying and, obviously, has proven that people love that story. They've retold it a lot of different times in a lot of different ways. So I just wanted to put my own spin on it. And, so I made our character Tamara, somebody who was into witchcraft, and these kids bully her and she dies.
Okay.
Frank, and they bury her in the woods, which is obviously the smart thing to do. And she walks into class on Monday,
Wow. Yeah.
And she's like, she was this kind of meek, shy girl before. Now she's this really empowered, like sexy kind of victim. And she starts going after the kids based on their kind of quote unquote sins. And, they can't go to the police and be like, hey, we killed her this weekend and now she's after us. Like, so they were kind of stuck. And
that's
it's just I think of probably all the films that have been done of mine. I think that's probably still my favorite. It was going to be done by a studio at a very big budget, and then we ended up doing it independently for not a big budget, and so we ended up having to kind of cut down on a lot of stuff. And they, some of the producers were a little prudish, so they really cut out some of the sexual stuff that I explored and toned down some of the violence, but it still got that fun, like
trying to open up the market to it, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. But it still got that really fun
edge to it.
This podcast is brought to you by thesuccessfulscreenwriter.com, where you can find instructional books, videos, courses, and screenplays of Hollywood's biggest hits to download. As an added bonus, visit www.thesuccessfulscreenwriter.com to download The Guide for Every Screenwriter for free. Yes, free. Available exclusively at thesuccessfulscreenwriter.com. Now, back to our show.
What else do you think about creating original concepts? I mean, do you look at character as a way to kind of reinforce the draw to your script?
I think that's important. I think, they'll always tell you there are no original ideas, which there by this point there aren't. Like, I've had people come up to me and say, hey, there was this Twilight Zone episode about somebody who had a nightmare about a number, and they went to the airport and they didn't, take the flight because it was we have one more seat. I forgot the name of it. Flight.
Yeah, sure.
22.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, you took it from that. And I'm like, so there's never an original idea, but I think what makes an idea original is what each writer brings to it. Because
yeah, that makes sense.
Because I tell whenever I speak to writers groups or whatever, I tell them, like, the thing, you shouldn't try to make what's out there that's popular, because then you're trying to be something else. You're trying to create something.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And what each of our life experiences, what we've been through, what we love, what we hate, what we fear, like all that stuff, nobody else in the world is like us. We're all so our individual worldview and our experiences are what's going to make our script stand out.
Yeah.
As opposed to trying to fit into like a box of what we think is popular.
Yeah. I think what I'm hearing you say is to find your voice as a writer.
Yes.
Because I've had students that will write and you'll read their script and it's like Shane Black wrote it, very kind of like, as my one friend put it, staccato. And it's like, well, that's great, but that's his voice. What's your voice? And they think by reading his scripts and emulating his style that works. And it's like, it's not how it works. You have to find your voice. Now, if you're inspired by that and you put in your toolbox, but bring in other things and find your own voice, Yeah.
That's 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was going to say, I tell people, because, when I was finding my voice too, I mean, I read a lot of horror scripts, and there would be things that I would like that I would just put in, like you said, my toolbox. Like, I didn't copy like a screenwriter's style, but I'm like, oh, this is kind of, this kind of gets across what I like to get across in a cool way. So you start building your toolbox with your own creativity. So you take those tools and then you'll find your voice within that mashup.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think screenwriters are the best thieves in the world.
Yeah.
Because we steal from other writers. We steal from everybody around us. If you piss us off at the grocery store, we're going to take that part. We're going to steal that, put that in the script. It's just the way it is. What else do you have going on? I guess, have you been working on some new stuff?
Yeah, I've, it's been really interesting. I directed my first film, Don't Look Back, which was really a great learning experience, especially as a writer.
Cool.
You don't realize, when you're writing, you're writing for the reader. I've always, told people remember that you're writing your script for the reader.
Absolutely.
So a lot of times you'll have to reiterate certain things just to make sure the reader doesn't forget what you said 40 pages ago.
Sure.
But when you have it in a movie, it's like, wow, I have like 4 scenes where this person says the same. So you're like, so it's interesting. You learn that how visual the movie medium is and how it differs from the audience that you're trying to reach with your screenplays. But I've also been working in animation since COVID hit, which has been wonderful. I get to kill people in a fairy tale one, but in a very child friendly way. So it's like you see a shadow of something.
I gotta see this. Is that out yet? Can we see any of the? We see Don't Look Back, but is the cartoon out yet or no?
The one cartoon they haven't announced yet, but it's going to be coming out Halloween of this year. Next year,
2021. Okay,
thank you. What years blend together. And the other cartoon is a spinoff of the Usagi Yojimbo Japanese comic book. So
oh wow,
that one's really, really fun.
I bet that's intense too.
It's intense, but it's fun because it's a spinoff. So it's we have Stan's the creator's like blessing on it, and he's overseeing stuff. So
okay,
but it's for a younger audience. But it's a spinoff. So it's not a straight adaptation. It's not like a hardcore adaptation of the books, but it's really fun to work on.
Oh man, that's really
they're
cool.
both really fun. So animation, it's obviously similar to screenwriting, but it's a lot more compacted, especially when you're doing like half an hour animated. It's like you've got to cram a lot of stuff,
Well, I just find this interesting because, you're working in animation, but you come from a horror background. And I always tell my students, or even in my book, that if you are a horror writer, I always recommend you work outside of your favorite genre to help finesse your own toolkit. Have you, have you found that's accurate?
I definitely do, especially working on these two particular shows, because one is very much, they're all about character and story, but one is very much about finding the humor, because the stories inherently can be darker, and then the other one's about finding the heart of this, finding heart in your characters and moments and things like that. So it's because we're cramming so much into so little space, it's made me definitely, I haven't actually started working on a new feature script yet, because I've still got a stack of other ones I'm trying to get going. But it's made me think, like, when I start even rewriting some of my older stuff now, it's like going through it and seeing, like, if that heart's there, and that just realizing how much you can put into, like, a little.
You're sharpening your sword. Yeah. That's absolutely amazing. That's really, to hear from, you're the guy that wrote Final Destination, and to see, like, you're writing this new genre, and you're even finding ways to improve, says really how we are all still students at this craft. There is no end goal, I guess you could say.
There's no peak. And I always think, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, and that I think that's the one thing that I think, it was good for me to learn, not to attach my personal value to what other people say about my work. But I also learned to take constructive criticism. I've learned how to sift through because there are a lot of criticism, but I've learned how to distill, like, okay, this is constructive. Yes. This is just somebody's opinion. This person just likes to tear people down. So
you're absolutely right. It's the note behind the note, right?
Yes.
It's like, okay, because you don't know if this dude woke up, just didn't get his coffee yet, or whatever. And so then you're like, okay, is this guy in the doghouse? Why is he coming at me so hard, bro? So I totally get it. No, and that's just something that comes with time, man. You kind of got to take a few hits to the face before you realize, okay, maybe I should step back and see what makes the work better.
And I think as long as you're doing that and continue to grow, because I think I do see a lot of younger writers, and I was probably the same way, where you think your first script is like the best script that's ever been written. Trying to talk to some other writers with that mindset is just like, beating your head against a brick wall. You're not going to grow. Any kind of artist or any kind of craftsperson, you obviously get better the more you do it. Like, that's just a fact of life. So
you're warming my heart, Geoffrey. You're a craftsman as much as you're an artist. I tend to be more of a craftsman. I still bring the art in. I think I have the mindset of a craftsman. We still have to have the art. But if you're just have the mindset of an artist, you're not going to really grow in the craft, because you can't accept criticism.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Because anything you touch is divinely inspired through art, and was like, well, that's great, but I can't sell it. So it's like, other people are going to, that's,
you have to learn to meld the two. Like, you have to learn to be a craftsman without, you can be an artist and a craftsman at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. And some people do think they are.
No, you're absolutely right. And actually, Dave Trottier was on the other day, and he even said that it's both. And I agree with you. You've got to be able to do both. You have to step back and say, how do I get better at this? How do I be a student? How do I work with other people to provide a product that they want? I got to thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. I want your Yoda. So can I have that? You don't.
That Yoda, you know who gave me that Yoda?
No.
My dentist.
That's awesome.
It's the coolest guy in the world.
I was going to say, you must be a great patient, and he must be a great dentist if he gave you the Yoda.
Yeah, it's Dr. Shaw right there. So he gave me this thing. I was like, this is amazing. It's going right there. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share in your social media, where you can tag us at The Successful Screenwriter.